Jacob, thanks for joining us.
Morning, McGraw. Thanks for having me.
No disrespect to you and your writing, but I read your story 3 times about this Paul McKee Bank of America story, and I still can't quite figure out the controversy. Can you sort of give us a little primer on this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is it's a little complicated, a little odd legal maneuvers, but basically the city was trying to make sure that developer Paul McKee, the guy behind Northside Regeneration, who's been saying he's going to redo most of or a big swath of North St. Louis for years, didn't regain, him and his bank didn't regain rights to some of the land that the city is getting ready to hand over to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for its new $1.7 billion Western headquarters. Basically, when the city decided to cut ties with McKee back in June, his bank, which had lent him millions of dollars over the years, decided to sue, said the city had misled it in getting it to give up its liens from the loans it had made to McKee on the land back in 2016. And in that lawsuit, it asked for its liens on the land back, which the city said, raised the possibility that it could get liens to a federal intelligence agency. So it pulled out all the stops to try to make sure that didn't happen, and the feds, of course, didn't want that to happen either.
Okay, so what did the judge rule the other day?
So this was on Friday. This was a what they call a quiet title case, basically in St. Louis Circuit Court. The City Economic Development Agency and their lawyers just asked the judge to say, hey, this lawsuit that the bank filed, which is the bank is based in Franklin County in Washington, Missouri, so it filed it in Franklin County, and they were asking a St. Louis judge to say, hey, this lawsuit can go forward. They can ask for monetary damages, but you can't let them have their rights to that land back. You can't let them have their liens back on this land that the city's supposed to hand over to the federal government next month in just a couple of weeks.
Okay, so they're already clearing a large, giant space for this building. Is this land a part of that space, or is it different space?
No, it's that. Yeah, if you happen to drive up there, at Jefferson and Cass, right north of downtown, I mean, you'll see it's a giant moonscape at this point.
So they're arguing over land that has already been cleared?
Yes. The city, back in 2016, when the NGA made its decision to stay in St. Louis and build North City, the city and McKee and the bank reached an agreement where McKee had owned about half of that land, and McKee agreed to give that land to the city, and the city commenced in, buying the rest of the houses, the land that he didn't own, clearing it, taking out the streets, taking out the basements. It spent about $100 million, a little more, getting it prepared to hand over to the federal government.
And so if they all agreed that he owned half the land and they were going to buy it, and they agreed, and I saw the news conference on TV, everyone was all excited, they start clearing the land. Why now is the city claiming that Paul McKee didn't own this land that they said he owned a year ago?
Well, if you remember, over the summer, there was a trial related to this on some different property, and a bunch of kind of new information came out about McKee's use of state tax credits. He got about $43 million in state tax credits back at the beginning of the decade. The Attorney General eventually sued him for tax credit fraud. Basically, there were allegations that he was inflating sales prices and not really holding on to the land, deeding it back to the sellers, not actually spending any money in order to procure state tax credits. And at that point, the city said, all right, we're done. And they defaulted on a 2009 development agreement with McKee. And McKee and his bank said, wait. When we agreed in 2016 to give you this land for the NGA, you said we were going to negotiate a new development agreement. That never happened. And so they commenced litigation to try to get back some leverage over the city and get back rights to that land they had agreed to sell in 2016.
So what's the end game for the city? That if the city wins and Paul McKee really didn't own that land, okay, great, the city gets it, and then what? They're going to turn it over to the feds?
Yeah, that is, I mean, all of this is being done to make sure that the city can hand over this land to the feds next month, free and clear of any claims that McKee and his bank have. They basically took a two-pronged legal approach. They used eminent domain on land that their economic development agency already owned, and filed this other lawsuit to get a judge to declare it free and clear of any liens, basically to make sure, the federal government wanted this. The federal government said, you've got to make sure that these guys aren't going to come back in a couple of years and say, hey, we've got a right to this land, and then the feds would have to pay them off for it.
Yeah. So, but is there a question? Is Paul McKee saying, wait a minute, I never gave you guys rights to this land? It sounds to me like Paul McKee is all into giving this land to the federal government, too.
Well, he accused the city, his bank, really, the Bank of Washington, accused the city of fraud. It said that the city misled them into giving up, into selling this land and giving up their liens on this land under the promise that they were going to negotiate a new development agreement, and that never happened. And so they say they want their liens on this land back. And the city has maintained that it's tried to negotiate a new development agreement. They never got that far, and they're within their rights to terminate the old development.
So what you're saying is, even though we've all shook hands and was all thrilled and patted ourselves on the back for the mapping agency to be built here in St. Louis, the land they're clearing and the land they want to turn over to the feds in a month still is fighting in court who actually owns that land or who has the rights to that land.
Yeah, and that only started in the last couple of months, but that's basically it. They wanted to undo that agreement where everybody was happy and shaking hands.
So if this is going to happen in a month, the judges have to be ruling on this pretty quickly then, don't they?
Yeah, well, that was the ruling Friday, and then a week before there was another ruling that let the city use eminent domain on its own land, which effectively clears it of any future claims from McKee and his bank. So it's won two lower court victories there, and of course, McKee and his bank have said they're going to appeal, but for now, it looks like the city is in a pretty good position to hand this off to the Fed.
The Attorney General lawsuits against Paul McKee, where do those stand?
Not much has happened in the last 90 days or so, or not 90 days, month and a half or so on the Attorney General lawsuit. The McKee and his bank they have a motion to dismiss. That still needs to be ruled on, but otherwise we're still in pretty early stages on that.
Jacob Barker, thanks for filling us in. We have to have you back as this story continues. Thanks for the good work, and thanks for the time.
Hey, thanks, McGraw.
Jacob Barker, business reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, trying to explain an unexplainable story.